So, time then for the press preview, a first look at tomorrow's front pages. And checking out those front pages with me tonight, The Guardian's chief political correspondent, Jessica Elgot, and PR consultant, Alex Deane. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Very good evening to both of you. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages. Britain's next Prime Minister, Sunak leads Johnson, reads the Eye. The Daily Telegraph, they're focusing on the leading support among Conservative MPs for Mr Sunak's second bid for number 10, a bid the former Chancellor is yet to publicly announce. While the FT leads on worries by investors and some Tory MPs concerned about the very idea of Johnson's return to number 10. The Times has a harsh take on that, highlighting a warning from Lord Hague that it could spark a Tory death spiral. Boris, I'm up for it. We are going to do this. The Daily Express leads on those remarks reported by Johnson ally Sir James Duddridge. Remarks we've heard here at Sky as well. Same as The Sun. I'm up for it, they say. A photograph of the former Prime Minister and his wife holidaying in the Caribbean covers the front page of the Mirror as 80,000 signed the paper's petition calling for a general election. While the Daily Mail has word on reported efforts by senior Tory MPs to broker a deal to unite Mr Johnson and Rishi Sunak. While, according to The Guardian, Tory tribes are going to war. And the Daily Star continues its salad-based satire of British politics. Their headline, they've tossed aside the lettuce, now they're serving up the aubergine. And just to remind you, you can scan the QR code you can see on the screen during the programme and check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And I'm joined tonight by Jessica Elgot and Alex Deane. Great to see you both this Friday evening. So much to talk about. Jessica, why don't we start with your paper and your front page for Saturday. Tory tribes go to war is a headline. A picture there of Penny Mordaunt, the only candidate so far to formally say that she is up for it. A picture of Rishi Sunak as well. No word from him, but his supporters say he has reached that magic 100. And there at the bottom, Boris Johnson, who, we are told, is up for it.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting if you look at the nominations for each one, you can basically see exactly how the Tory party divides up. You can see, you can pretty much map how many votes Boris Johnson might have got if there'd have been a confidence vote in him the second time round, just before he left, which he was advised he would lose. And I think, Tory MPs were saying to me yesterday, they thought that he could probably get about 60, 70, maybe 80 MPs to endorse him, but they didn't think that he could get to 100. And that's what he's got to do over the next few hours. He's really got to make a call, I think, by tomorrow afternoon about whether he's actually going to formally declare that he's standing or not, in a way that only Penny Mordaunt has so far. He will only do that if it looks like he's certain to reach the threshold, as Rishi Sunak already has tonight.
Yeah, so this time next week, Alex, we will have a new Prime Minister. Who do you think it's going to be?
Well, I actually think it's likely to be Boris Johnson. I think that these numbers, the most interesting thing to come out of them, of course, it's no great surprise that Rishi Sunak has made these numbers because, of course, he won the rounds amongst members of Parliament last time when Liz Truss went to the final two with him. The biggest story from this, the declared numbers so far, is how low Penny Mordaunt is, suggesting that the two people who've been either at war to the knife with one another or might make up, depending on who you believe, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are a final two. And unless you're going to see lots of abstentions, and I doubt very much that that's going to happen, I think the votes are going to pile up enough for Boris Johnson to make it over the 100. I'll be honest, Jonathan, I didn't think that 48 hours ago, but talking to people in and around Westminster, looking at what people are saying and thinking, I think if Boris declares he's going to get over 100, and I think once he goes to the party membership, he wins in a landslide.
Yeah, front page of the Daily Telegraph, picture of Rishi Sunak. Sunak races to secure majority of Tory MPs. Is that your thinking, Jessica, that we're looking at a Sunak versus Johnson vote?
I think so, and I think if Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are put to the membership, then like Alex says, I think that it's very likely the membership will pick Boris Johnson, and they've already rejected Rishi Sunak once, so it's really up to MPs now if they really feel strongly enough to want to stop Boris Johnson, then they need to just pile all of their votes behind Sunak and try and arrange a coronation on Monday. I mean, I think that's obviously what people who are behind Sunak are hoping will happen. But I think that, like everybody, I think there's been some surprise at the number of people even people who wrote, letters of no confidence or said that they would resign because of Boris Johnson's leadership now, as now saying that they're backing him again for leader. And it's interesting to kind of understand the psychology behind that. I suspect people have been so spooked by the polls that have been given Labour such an enormous lead, and given that putting the Conservatives in oblivion territory, that they think the only person they can possibly go back to is someone who's previously delivered them an election victory. But of course, the polls have changed an awful lot in terms of what the public think about Boris Johnson. They don't see him particularly in that way anymore. But you can see why some Tory MPs think, why would we not try the man who won it for us last time?
We're in remarkable times, Alex, aren't we? I mean, it is quite staggering.
Oh, yeah.
Front page of The Sun, Boris breaks his silence. I'm up for it. I mean, Boris Johnson had 148, wasn't it, of his colleagues vote against him in that confidence vote in June, followed by nearly 60 ministerial resignations 1 month later. And here we are looking at a possibility of him being back in number 10.
Well, if he does it, it's the biggest political comeback of all time, isn't it? I mean, so quick as well as so significant. But look, Jessica's been right on everything she said, but there's two very specific things I'd pick out. First of all, Tory members of Parliament don't want to have an election right now for the very reason that she describes, that they think they would do very badly and there'd be rather fewer of them. And there's a lot of talk in the country, of course, about the next Prime Minister needing a mandate, and you can't have possibly a third Prime Minister without having a general election. Well, Boris Johnson won the general election in 2019, and there's a school of thought that says, this may convince people or not, but there's a school of thought that says that Boris Johnson has that mandate because he won in 2019. And secondly, Jessica is also right to point out that plenty of these people expressed no confidence in Boris Johnson, either privately in their votes or publicly. But, I think we might generously describe it as situational flexibility, that in the current circumstances, they see their best option or their least worst option as a return to Boris Johnson. He really might do this. Yeah,
but Alex, when you speak to members of the public, and we've been speaking to lots of people today in various constituencies, and you look at the polling, that would suggest that Rishi Sunak is the favourite at the moment for the public, rather than Boris Johnson to lead the country. Certainly, if there were an election tomorrow.
It depends entirely on who you ask, and I've seen plenty of Vox Pops on your channel, but I must say particularly more on others, where people have been more supportive of Boris Johnson. In the end, Vox Pops ain't going to get it done, and members of Parliament will think they've got a sense from their constituents of where sympathies lie. Of course, it's the people who self-identify as most interested, who express themselves volubly, who are heard more than others. And in the end, the only vote that really matters is when you go to an election, and there are plenty in the Tory party who, this may be an outdated view, but there are plenty of people in the Tory party who think that Boris is an election winner. And staring down the barrel of the current polling numbers as they are, they think, why not give it a try?
Yeah, let's have a look at the front of the Daily Mail. Interesting front page, Jessica, from the Mail. Could Boris and Rishi now unite to save Tories? This is touching on what you said earlier. I mean, there is a chasm between these two, isn't there? Can you see a scenario where the two of them could sit down together over the next 48 hours and come up with some sort of plan? And what would it be? What would it look like?
Bluntly, I find it incredibly hard to envisage any scenario where this is possible. I mean, the two, remember the excuse, and, this is probably rooted in some truth, that Rishi Sunak gave for resigning from the government was that him and Johnson were supposed to give a joint speech on the economy, and they could not agree on their economic plans. They were so divergent in their view of what the economy needed that Sunak felt he had no choice but to resign. And obviously there were many other things that fueled that. It was his deep reservations about Johnson's character. Both of those things haven't gone away, but the first one is particularly important at this time, because if the two of them couldn't even agree on an economic approach in the summer, They certainly, when they're staring down the barrel of this winter and the economic turmoil that Liz Truss's government has caused, it's to me completely implausible that they could try and find a way now. I would think it very unlikely that Sunak would be prepared to serve again under Boris Johnson. And should Sunak offer Boris Johnson something like Home Secretary? I don't think that there's. I would find it very difficult for him to do that. And what would be the price? It would strike me as very surprising if one were to drop out of the contest for the other.
Yeah, can you see any scenario, Alex, where that might work? Yeah.
Why would either of them back down at this point? Yeah. There's so much to gain and so little to lose by trying, and contrary-wise, so little to gain by doing a deal now. I just don't see it. With due respect to people who've written the story,
well, apart from potentially the future of the party, Alex.
Yeah, well, but of course, each of them believes that they are the future of the party. Just as we always say and point out as people have this corrosive view about politics that they're all in it for themselves and so forth. People go into public service to try to make a difference and do good on both sides of the house. But also, people don't just pursue these things for personal ambition, although admittedly and obviously it plays a part. They also pursue great offices of state because they genuinely think they are the best person for the job. And the thing about these people, all of them now who are in this field, they genuinely think they are the best people to lead the party. It's not just because they want to preen and say, look at me. It's because they genuinely think, and many viewers will think they're profoundly wrong, but they genuinely think they're the best people to lead the country and our party.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? And we will talk plenty more about this between now and midnight. Thank you both for the moment. Coming up after the break, calls for Liz Truss to turn down £115,000 yearly allowance for former Prime Ministers. Stay with us. Welcome back. We'll speak to our paper reviewers again in a moment. But first of all, some breaking news. We understand that Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, is now on board a plane in the Dominican Republic. He's about to take that overnight flight with British Airways back to the UK. You can see him there in that snatched photograph. Looks like he might be sitting next to Carrie, his wife, about to leave the Dominican Republic and head back to London amid speculation that he is going to aim to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. We'll bring you more details on that as we get it. But as you can see, Boris Johnson cutting short his holiday in the Dominican Republic and heading back on British Airways flight to London. Jessica and Alex still with me. Jessica, there we are. Boris Johnson is on his way back. What do you make of that?
I mean, there is something quite funny about this, isn't there, in a way that so many MPs talked about having doubts about Boris Johnson's work ethic and commitment to the job and having a sort of fly by the seat of his pants approach to being Prime Minister. And we've got the Prime Minister flying back from a Caribbean holiday in order to try and be the next be Prime Minister again, even though all of last week the House was sitting, it wasn't a recess. There was plenty of votes in Parliament that he could have been attending, but he was on holiday. And, whether that might make some MPs remember what it was like having Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is, perhaps it will.
And we're hearing, Alex, he's getting support. John Whittingdale, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Alex Sharma, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He could do it, we're told, by his supporters.
I think he really could do it. And I have been interested in the number of people who are cabinet and former cabinet ministers who've declared for Boris Johnson. The Guido Fawkes website, which has got the rolling spreadsheet, must be getting 10 times the traffic they normally do, with no offence to those guys. And it's been very interesting to see the names that have come out. Also very interesting to see that they've got individuals who've personally affirmed to Guido that they do support Boris, but for one reason or another cannot be named. So they're a whip or they're a vice chairman of the party and so forth. So they're not allowed to publicly declare their support, but they have affirmed that they're going to do that. I think it's quite difficult to see a scenario now where Boris Johnson doesn't get over 100 and isn't in the ballot. But it was very interesting. Before the break, we were discussing Jessica and I were having a discussion about what would happen in that round and what you would need to do if you wanted to exclude Boris Johnson. Jessica's theory was, well, you just all need to pile in for Sunak, as in there's only one person that gets over 100. And I think that theory is now not going to work. I think Boris Johnson is going to get over 100. If you were of the Stop Boris persuasion, you would need to pile your votes in to Penny Mordaunt so that there are two people above Boris Johnson. And it seems to me they just can't do that now. They can't rig it. The people who are for the Stop Boris movement are not going to succeed. He's going to make it to the final two, and if he makes it to the final two, he'll win with the party.
And Jessica, we have just had it confirmed by our correspondent on board that plane. Boris Johnson, his wife and children all flying back economy, clearly very aware of the cost of living crisis.
Yes, well, I mean, Boris Johnson, famously used to privately complain about how little he was paid as Prime Minister, and he hasn't had very long to make those very lucrative speeches. We know that he made one that was paid around £300,000 for, in between leaving Downing Street and now, but he hasn't had a lot of those to really bulk up. And so if he wants to go back to his very nicely decorated flat in number 10, then he's going to have to go back to that meagre six-figure salary that he was earning as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I don't think Liz Truss had time to redecorate and put up new wallpaper, did she? Thank you both for the moment. So that breaking news, Boris Johnson is returning to the UK from the Dominican Republic. As you can see, he is on board that aircraft, flying back to London overnight. His supporters have been urging him to mount a comeback just 6 weeks after he left number 10, after being forced to resign by a cabinet rebellion over a series of scandals.